I watched as my wife slid a piece of paper across the table, her list of demands for our divorce. At the top, she wanted full ownership of our house, the same house I built with my own hands. She didn't flinch when she asked for half of my company either. All this after I caught her having an affair with her personal trainer. But instead of arguing, I simply smiled and said, "That might be a problem. I sold the house last month." Anakunam. Her smirk disappeared the moment I showed her the paperwork. She had no idea I had already transferred everything important, long before she served me those divorce papers. See, when someone betrays you, you can either lose your temper or stay calm and outsmart them. I chose the latter. If you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted, someone who thought they could take everything you worked for, then you'll want to hear how I turned the tables without raising my voice. What would you do if your spouse cheated and then tried to claim half of your life's work? Subscribe and stay, because here's how I guarantee she'll walk away with a lot less money than she expected. I wasn't born with much. No trust fund, no safety net, just a willingness to work harder than anyone else. At 28, I started my own construction company in Philadelphia. It was just me, a beat-up pickup truck, and a handful of tools. Back then, Caitlin was by my side, cheering me on through every late night and early morning. We were partners, or at least that's what I believed. When business was slow, we tightened our belts together. When I landed my first big contract, we celebrated with takeout on the living room floor. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt real. Over the years, I built that company from the ground up. 15 years of sweat, calloused hands, and missed holidays. I went from patching drywall in small apartments to designing custom homes across the city. Clients trusted my name. Employees relied on my leadership. But success has a funny way of revealing cracks you didn't notice before. As my company grew, so did the distance between Caitlin and me. I'd leave before sunrise and come home long after dark. At first she understood or pretended to, but somewhere along the way her support turned into resentment. She started talking about needing balance and finding herself. That's when Jason entered the picture, her new personal trainer. I thought nothing of it at first. I wanted her to be happy, to feel fulfilled while I handled the business. But then came the late-night sessions at the gym, weekend retreats with friends, and conversations that ended the moment I walked into the room. I tried to ignore the signs, told myself I was being paranoid. After all, we'd built a life together. She wouldn't throw that away. Then I saw the hotel charges on our joint credit card, places we'd never stayed, on nights she claimed to be out with her girlfriends. Still, I didn't confront her. I wanted proof, not just suspicion. That proof came one afternoon when I was driving to a client meeting. I passed by a restaurant we used to love, and there they were. Caitlin and Jason, sitting in a corner booth, leaning in close. When she reached across the table to touch his face, I knew. It felt like someone had knocked the wind out of me. 15 years of marriage, undone in a single glance. I didn't storm in. I didn't cause a scene. Instead, I drove away, straight to my attorney's office. I wasn't about to let anger cost me everything I had worked for. Because in Pennsylvania, divorce isn't just personal, it's financial warfare. And Caitlin, whether she deserved it or not, was entitled to half of everything. That included my company and the house I had personally designed and built. Every nail, every beam, every inch of it was mine. But if she wanted a fight, she'd get one, just not the kind she was expecting. That day, sitting across from my lawyer, we crafted a plan. A legal, airtight way to protect what was mine before Caitlin could sink her claws into it. Because if Caitlin thought she could betray me and still walk away with the rewards of my hard work, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The hardest part wasn't discovering Caitlin's affair. It was pretending I didn't know. For weeks, I came home to the same cold conversations, the same fake smiles. She'd tell me she was heading to yoga or meeting friends for drinks, and I'd nod, acting like the clueless husband she thought I was. But behind that calm facade, every move I made was calculated. My attorney had laid it out clearly. If Caitlin filed for divorce before I acted, I'd be forced into a brutal split of assets. Pennsylvania's equitable distribution laws didn't care who was faithful or who built what. On paper, she was entitled to half, so I had to move first. Quietly, legally, and without raising suspicion. The house was my biggest concern. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a symbol of everything I'd built. I could still remember the long weekends spent laying the foundation, the nights I worked by flashlight installing cabinets. That house was mine in a way no court could ever understand. That's when Mark, my younger brother, came into play. Mark and I had always been close. He knew about Caitlin before I even said a word. When I told him my plan, he didn't hesitate. I drafted a sale agreement, transferring full ownership of the house to Mark for exactly $1. It was perfectly legal, just a simple property transfer between family members. No banks, no red flags. And most importantly, it happened before any divorce papers hit my doorstep. We had a private agreement, of course. Once the dust settled, I'd buy it back at the same price. Until then, it was untouchable. But I didn't stop there. My company, my pride and joy, needed protection too. If Caitlin's lawyer got aggressive, they'd come after my business valuation. So under my attorney's guidance, I restructured ownership. I transferred 60% of my shares to my sister temporarily, making her the majority shareholder on paper. It looked like I'd given up control, but in reality it was just a safeguard, one Caitlin would never see coming. Every step I took felt like walking a tightrope. One wrong move, one hint of what I was doing, and Caitlin could act faster than I was prepared for. At home, she grew bolder, coming back later, smiling at texts she didn't bother hiding anymore. I think she believed she had me exactly where she wanted, the overworked husband too blind to see his marriage falling apart. What she didn't realize was that I was counting down the days, waiting for her to make the first official move. And then, 2 weeks later, it happened. I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table, a manila envelope in front of her. She didn't look sad. She didn't look guilty. If anything, she looked satisfied. "I think it's time we stop pretending," she said, sliding the envelope toward me. "My lawyer's already drafted everything. This will be easier if you don't fight it." I opened the envelope and scanned the papers. At the top was a detailed list of demands. Full ownership of the house, 50% of my company. Spousal support. I looked up at her, and for the first time in weeks, I genuinely smiled. "Is that all?" I asked calmly. She crossed her arms, mistaking my composure for defeat. "My lawyer says I'm entitled to it. You know that, right?" I nodded slowly. "Oh, I know, but you might want to give him a call, because things aren't exactly how they used to be." I stood up, walked over to my desk, and pulled out 2 documents. The deed transfer to Mark and the company restructuring papers. As I placed them in front of her, I watched the color drain from her face. This wasn't the reaction she had expected. She thought she was walking into an easy victory, but instead she realized the game had already been played, and she was too late. And the best part? I hadn't raised my voice once. Caitlin stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. Her confidence, so strong just moments before, was crumbling right in front of me. This is a joke, right?" she finally said, her voice shaking. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my tone calm. "No joke, Caitlin. The house isn't mine anymore. And as for the company, well, I don't exactly own the majority of it right now." She snatched up her phone, dialing her lawyer with trembling fingers. I could hear the sharpness in her voice as she demanded answers, pacing the room like a caged animal. I didn't need to hear both sides of the conversation. I already knew how it would go. Every move I made was legal, questionable maybe, but fully within my rights. After a few minutes, she hung up, her face pale with rage and disbelief. He said you can't do this," she hissed. I raised an eyebrow. "Seems like I already did." For the first time, Caitlin realized she wasn't in control. All those weeks she thought she was playing me, letting me work myself to the bone while she ran around with Jason. She never once considered that I'd be 2 steps ahead. And this wasn't just a minor setback for her. This was checkmate. But as much as I wanted to feel triumphant, there was a weight pressing down on me, a quiet, bitter truth. This wasn't just about winning. It was about accepting that the woman I had once loved, the woman who celebrated my first paycheck and shared dreams of a future together, was gone. All that was left was someone who saw me as a bank account and a burden. That night, after she stormed out to clear her head, I sat alone in the house I no longer technically owned. The walls felt colder, the rooms emptier. I walked through each space, running my hands along the surfaces I had built, remembering every nail, every drop of sweat that went into making this place a home. It was supposed to be where we raised a family, where we grew old together. Instead, it had become a battleground. The next morning, Caitlin returned with a forced sense of composure. She handed me a revised settlement proposal, her lawyer clearly realizing they had lost their leverage. Gone were the demands for the house and half the company. Now it was a modest request for a financial payout, something to save face. I signed without hesitation. I wanted this chapter closed. As she gathered her things over the next few days, the silence between us was deafening. No arguments, no apologies. Just two strangers dividing up what was left of a broken life. But before she walked out for the last time, she couldn't resist one final jab. "You know, Eric," she said, standing in the doorway with her suitcase, "you might think you've won, but you'll always be that workaholic who chose his business over his wife." I looked at her, truly seeing her for who she was, not the woman I married, but the person she had become. And with a steady voice, I replied, "No, Caitlin, I chose to protect what I built when you chose someone else's bed over our marriage." She didn't have a response, just a glare, and then she was gone. The door closed behind her, and with it, any chance of return, literal or emotional. That was the moment it truly hit me. There was no going back, no fixing what was broken. But as painful as it was, I knew I'd made the right choices. Because sometimes the only way to move forward is to burn the bridge behind you. When the final settlement was signed, most people would have felt relief. But I wasn't done, not yet. Caitlin thought she could betray me, walk away with a payout, and fall into Jason's arms like nothing happened. She believed she'd traded up, leaving the boring husband behind for excitement and freedom. But I knew something she didn't. While I was protecting my assets, I also hired a private investigator, just to satisfy a lingering curiosity. If Caitlin was bold enough to cheat on me, who's to say Jason wasn't playing his own game? And sure enough, within a week, my PI delivered a folder thick with photos and reports. Jason wasn't the loyal partner Caitlin imagined. When he wasn't with her, he was entertaining another client, a younger woman, just as naive as Caitlin had once been. I didn't need to use that information. Legally, the divorce was done. But sometimes revenge isn't about the courtroom. It's about making sure the truth hits exactly where it hurts. A few days before Caitlin was scheduled to move out, I invited her over under the pretense of discussing loose ends. She arrived, guarded but curious, probably thinking I was going to beg or offer her something more. Instead, I handed her the folder. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing it suspiciously. "Consider it a parting gift," I said calmly. She opened it, flipping through photo after photo. Jason holding hands with another woman, kissing her outside his gym, checking into the same hotels Caitlin used to sneak away to. I watched her face harden, her jaw clenched tighter with every page. For once, she had nothing to say. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. All I said was, "Looks like you weren't the only one looking for something on the side." She slammed the folder shut and stormed out without another word. That was the last time I saw her. With Caitlin gone, I turned my focus back to rebuilding. Not just my life, but my future on my own terms. True to our agreement, Mark sold the house back to me for that same symbolic dollar. Standing in front of it, keys in hand, I felt something I hadn't in months. Peace. I reversed the company's restructuring, reclaiming full ownership. Business was booming, and without the weight of a toxic marriage dragging me down, I poured my energy into expanding even further. Friends asked me if I felt lonely, if the empty house echoed too loudly at night. But honestly, it didn't, because every corner of that house, every project at work, was a reminder that I had faced betrayal head-on and walked away without losing what mattered most. Revenge didn't come in the form of yelling matches or public humiliation. It came from staying sharp, staying quiet, and letting the facts do the damage. Caitlin wanted to hurt me and profit from it. Instead, she walked away with far less than she expected, and a broken illusion about the man she'd left me for. I heard through the grapevine that Jason dumped her shortly after. She tried to save face online, posting pictures like she was living her best life. But those who knew, knew. As for me, I didn't need to post anything. Success spoke louder than any status update, and every time I pulled into my driveway, I was reminded that patience and planning had saved everything I built. Because when someone tries to take what's yours, the best revenge isn't shouting, it's making sure they walk away empty-handed while you continue living the life they thought they could steal. The day Caitlin officially moved out was quiet. Too quiet. No screaming. No last-minute negotiations. Just the sound of boxes being carried out and the occasional slamming of a door. I watched from the porch as she loaded the last of her things into Jason's car. It was almost poetic, leaving behind the life we built together to chase after a man who, unbeknownst to her, had already moved on emotionally. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't even look back. As the car disappeared down the street, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, but most of all, closure. I walked back inside, letting the weight of the past few months finally settle. The house felt different now. It wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was mine, truly mine. A week later, I got a call from Mark. "You're not going to believe this," he said, barely able to contain his laughter. "Guess who just tried to hit me up?" I didn't have to guess. Caitlin, I sighed. Yup, said she was confused about the house sale. Wanted to know if there was a way she could still claim part of it. Ew. I couldn't help but chuckle. Even after everything, she was still grasping at straws, trying to salvage some piece of what she thought she was owed. "Tell her the price went up," I joked. $1 million. Of course, Mark didn't entertain her. He blocked her number and that was that. But Caitlin's world continued to unravel. It didn't take long for word to spread that Jason had dumped her. Apparently, the moment the divorce was finalized and the payout wasn't what she expected, Jason lost interest. She wasn't the prize he thought she'd be. I heard from mutual friends that Caitlin tried to keep up appearances, posting photos of brunches, yoga retreats, and inspirational quotes about new beginnings. But behind the filters and hashtags, reality was hitting her hard. Meanwhile, I was thriving. The business expanded into new markets, and I hired a team to handle the day-to-day operations, giving me time to actually enjoy the life I built. One evening, while grabbing dinner at a local steakhouse, I ran into an old friend who hadn't heard about the divorce. After catching up, he asked, "Do you ever regret it? You know, how things ended." I thought about it for a moment. Regret trusting the wrong person? Sure, I admitted. But regret how I handled it? Not a chance. Because in that moment, when Caitlin realized she'd lost everything she tried to steal, I knew I'd won. Not out of spite, not because I wanted to see her suffer, but because I refused to let betrayal define me. I didn't explode. I didn't stoop to her level. I stayed calm. I protected what was mine. And I let her own actions be her downfall. Some people think revenge is about getting even. But real revenge, it's about walking away with your dignity intact, while they're left picking up the pieces of their bad decisions. As months passed, I barely thought about Caitlin anymore. She became just another lesson, one I wouldn't forget, but one I no longer carried with me. The house was peaceful again. No tension, no lies, just the sound of a man who knew his worth and refused to let anyone take it from him. 6 months later, I stood in front of my house, keys in hand, just like I had all those years ago when I first finished building it. But this time, it felt different. Not because the structure had changed, but because I had. I wasn't the same man who once believed loyalty was enough to guarantee happiness. I wasn't naive enough to think that hard work alone could hold a marriage together. I had learned painfully that trust is fragile, and sometimes the people you build your life with are the very ones who will try to tear it down. But I also learned something far more important. Revenge doesn't always come with fireworks or dramatic confrontations. It doesn't have to be loud to be effective. Sometimes the best revenge is quiet. It's in the patience to plan when you've been wronged, in the strength to stay calm when every part of you wants to lash out, and in the satisfaction of knowing you protected what mattered, without sacrificing your integrity. I never set out to destroy Caitlin. I set out to make sure she couldn't destroy me. And in the end, that made all the difference. As for Caitlin, last I heard, she was living in a small apartment across town, trying to rebuild a life that didn't turn out the way she expected. Jason, already on to his next client. I don't wish her misery. I don't need to. Because I'm too busy living the life I earn, on my terms, in the home I built, surrounded by the peace that comes when you outthink betrayal. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone facing a similar storm, it's this. When someone tries to take advantage of your trust, don't let anger dictate your next move. Let strategy do the talking. Because revenge isn't about getting even. It's about making sure you walk away with everything that truly matters, while they're left realizing just how much they've lost. What about you? If someone betrayed you and tried to claim your hard-earned success, would you fight fire with fire? Or would you stay calm and let your plan speak for itself? Let me know what you do. I'm curious to hear how you'd handle it.